Now tonight, of course, we are answering the question, is there hope for the singles? Is there hope for the singles? I had just finished preaching in one of our churches in the south. As I was coming down, or rather coming out of the building, towards my car, I noticed that there was a senior lady coming from the opposite direction. She was coming to me. And of course, as I was going down, I was greeting people, and they were hugging one another, etc., etc. And she noticed that this was going to be a long process. And she decided to go and wait for me next to my car. Eventually, of course, I got there, and she said one thing. In fact, it was a question. Pastor, as one of the preachers in this church, what are you doing for the single parents that fill our churches? That was the question. It was straightforward, direct, and it needed an honest answer. I could judge by looking beyond the spectacles that she also might have been one of those single parents, because I could see the tears running down. It is that question that I would like to answer with you tonight. We want to look at the question, is there hope for the single parents? Now, of course, the question that comes first is, who are these single parents? Who are these single parents? These are women and men who have children out of wedlock. In other words, these people are not married, but they have children. It's quite a number of them that are here. In fact, I've bumped against a number of them in each of our churches that I attend. Then, of course, the second group is that of women and men who remain with children after divorce. Oh, yes. It's one of the things that are facing our church today. It's a question of divorce. I'll be talking about that a little later. And, of course, I still plan to go a little deeper into it, maybe on Sabbath if I find the chance. And then the third group is that of women and men who remain with children after the loss of a partner through death. And, of course, we have a good number even in this room. So those categories compose what we call single parents. Now, there are factors that lead, to this singleness. Yeah, we start first with the young women and men who have children out of wedlock. Now, you'll notice that I've left out men there. Do you notice that? I've just said this is the young women. I've done so purposely. I've done so purposely because the people who really suffer in this thing are actually women, not men. It is this young woman who is going to carry this little baby for 9 months. The young man is enjoying himself there. He's going about making other children elsewhere. Yeah. While this one is carrying this child for 9 months. And even when she's going to give birth to this child, it's still not an easy job. Now, I was talking to one young lady who was at our place one time, and she was helping there at home. She said to me, Mfundis, I feel it. I feel it when it's going to be cold outside. Or rather, when it's going to be overcast outside. I asked her, how do you feel? She said, I have scars on my body. Many scars. And giving birth to children. This is not an easy thing. Some do not even make it. They don't come out of those maternity halls. And probably I'll mention this a little later, and maybe not in this lecture necessarily. But it is this woman who forfeits school, forfeits job, and sometimes this child that you give birth to is going to be sick. So the rest of your time is going to spend attending, to this child. While the young man is free there, he's enjoying himself. So I've left this purposefully. And that is, I've left men purposefully so that I can focus on the women. Now, of course, these women who suffer, who actually who are these single parents, they become tired of waiting for marriage. We have a number of them here who are waiting faithfully. I'm talking of people who at first had their trust in God. They trust those promises that say, you ask and it will be forgiven. Isn't it so? Or rather, it will be given to you. And you knock, it will be open to you, etc., etc. But this goes on, and that door is never opened. That request is never answered. And in the meantime, this person is bombarded, by temptations from left and right, and has been serving God. Some of them are even Sabbath school leaders here in the church. Some treasurers. They are waiting, hopingly, that someday God will bless them with a partner. But this never happens. Instead, they suffer, and these temptations that bombard them from left and right, eventually they yield to this temptation, and they have a child. Aye. Of course, some of them become these single parents out of sheer mistake in the handling of a love relationship. There are young women here who are very careless when it comes to this. They treat, this relationship as if it is marriage itself. I always, have people who come to my office who come all the way from Pretoria, going to East London, some Johannesburg, some Maritzburg, etc., etc. They come and stay in those B&Bs and hotels because they want that interfacing with me in counseling. I never ask them as to where they sleep because I don't want to hear what I don't want to hear. And I don't, because I'm not too sure as what they are going to say. And in that way, they find themselves, pregnant, etc., and they become single parents. They treat this relationship as if it's marriage itself. All right. Now, of course, once they have a child, many times this never come to fruition. The young man never really fulfills his promise because he got what he wanted. When a young man pursues you, many times he just wants to sleep with you. Once he gets that, then there's nothing else that he wants. It's going to go his way. And when I ask these young women, did you ever have a relationship? Oh, yes, in fact, I had one. And did you have any child in that? Yes, I had. And what happened to the father? I don't know what happened, Fundis. As soon as we got this child, and we couldn't get along together until we decided, to separate, to go our separate ways. I know that while to you is something that shocks you, to the young man it was calculated. Because that's exactly what he wanted. And when he got it, he no longer felt that he needed you anymore. So this is what happens at the end. You become a single parent. All right. Of course, some of them become single parents out of a blatant misbehavior. Now, this group does not take, anything seriously. Even here at church, they come because there's nowhere else where they can go on Sabbath. They don't, take care of, they don't pay attention to many things that are taught by the church, including sleeping with men. And then, of course, they sleeps with this one. Tomorrow he sleeps with another one. He has a child. She has a child from this man, and another child from another man, etc. Sometimes you find a young woman having 4 children from different fathers. Different fathers. You can see that this person is not serious. Sometimes there are women who say to me, Mfundis, I wanted a child. I got involved in this relationship because I wanted a child. She was not planning to get married, but she just wanted a child, just for fun. You have these people who are also who happen to be in our midst. All right. Then you have the second category, that is women who remain with children after divorce. Or if I can go into this one, talk about divorce to you tonight. We can spend the whole night talking about this one. Now, the first thing, of course, that causes divorce is the infidelity between spouses. And I'm going to be talking about that one on Sabbath morning. And the second one is an abuse in all of its forms. You have what we call physical abuse. If I could open this cell phone and talk to you about physical abuse, you'd be shocked. Physical abuse in South Africa. One time I was in my office, it was in the evening. I was visited by a prominent someone in our society. It was a lady, and who came for counseling. It was around 9-ish in the evening. Now, as we were talking, I noticed that she stretched, and her neck, because she wanted to listen to what I was saying. Maybe she became uncomfortable, because she said to me, Mfundisi, I don't want this to make you uneasy. Yeah, I don't hear. I'm trying to hear what you're saying. Now, I can't hear with this ear. I was beaten by my husband early in the morning, and he had not slept home that night. Kept on going out, looking for him. It was just dark in the night. I didn't know where to begin, and looking for him. I would come inside and, go to his phone. It would go into a voicemail. And there would be something that said to me, this man is enjoying himself somewhere. When I try to react to that, something else would say, you might think that he's enjoying himself and yet he's in trouble. And I did that yo-yo the whole night, crying. I didn't know, what to do. Early in the morning, I heard the door opening. And I ran to the door. Lo and behold, it was this man. It was this man. And when I tried to react, because I could see that he had been enjoying himself that evening, that night. When I tried to react to this, and they slapped me and this side, and I fell. She says I was pregnant, 4 months pregnant. He kicked me on the tummy. She says, Mfundisi, this year took 3 doctors at St. Dominic's and was operated and was closed completely. When I looked at this woman, I felt like crying. That was the first one. The second one, it was at Helderberg College. That's where I taught for a number of years. Now, as I was going out of the campus, before I go to the gate, somebody emerged from the farm. It was a young lady, and she came to join me here. I picked her up. She got into the car. She said, Mfundisi, I'm going there. It's a small town called Strand. It's about 15 kilometers from where we were. And then, of course, she was doing that every morning, coming to work because she was working above Helderberg College, in the forest there. About 15 kilometers one way. Another 15 kilometers when she goes home. And she was doing this every day. But that was nothing. Then she said to me, Mfundisi, I was in marriage. And my husband abused me physically until he broke this arm. When I was writhing and weeping, he said, this is nothing. And then she said to me, Mfundisi, I threw in the towel. Decided to quit. I left marriage. And I can talk to you, for the whole night talking to you about the physical abuse in South Africa. That is one. Then you have what we call the verbal abuse. There people are painting, each other, with all the insults, etc. I remember one time I was sitting with a couple in my office. The gentleman was reclining on our sofa, a moneyed fellow, very educated fellow. And when we came to this issue of verbal abuse, the young lady pulled herself together and she said, Mfundisi, we are now going to be talking about something that is very serious in my relationship. There is no insult that is spared by this man. He throws everything that he can think of at me. There are times when he would say to me, and I'm going to say this because I'll have no other chance to talk to you about it. There are times when he says to me, you are just a bitch. You go and join the dogs, they are waiting for you outside. I asked him, do you ever say that? He said, no, I say it. Moneyed fellow. And one time we were 3 pastors. One was sitting there at the helm, and the second one in the middle, and I was here at the tail. We had come to reconcile a couple that had separated for a while. And as we're talking, the young man was sitting on a chair which was a little higher than that of his wife, so that he could look at his wife this way, while the woman was looking at him this way. And then, of course, he said, you've called me for, just like that. Yeah, if you called me for this war. We were quiet. It seemed as if you could take a knife and cut the verbal abuse that was in that room. And we were all quiet. And, of course, the woman was sitting there, didn't respond. Highly professional person. Highly disciplined somebody. In fact, I was their guest speaker when they got married. I learned of a story. And she was quiet even at that moment when this man was just painting her, with all kinds of insults. Now, at the end, we asked the pastor who was at the helm, to close with prayer. Instead of praying, he just burst crying. He couldn't handle the verbal abuse that was in that room. But these 2 are said to be still better than the third one, and that we call emotional abuse. Now, when we talk about emotional abuse, we mean that these 2 people are no longer eating together. There is no conversation between them. One is glued to WhatsApp, while the other is busy looking at the sports. When they go to bed, the one who goes first looks that side, and the one who comes, last will look the other side. There is no communication whatsoever. And psychologists have found that if you want to take your wife straight and put her on a wheelbarrow, take her to the bosom of another man, you must abuse her emotionally. Women cannot put up with that. And this also, at the end, I could tell you stories and stories. This also leads to divorce. Then, of course, the incompatibility. The incompatibility means that these people you have two people who are different in many ways. According to maybe the level of education, one is highly educated, while the other is educated just enough to be able to write her name or his name. And even in their conversation, there is a disparity. There is no connection whatsoever. They differ in culture, differ in background, and many times this thing can also lead to divorce. And I'm talking here as a counselor because I deal with this kind of situations every day. All right. Then, of course, you have the women who remain with children after the loss of a partner through death. Now, people die with sickness. And I remember one time I was invited at Google to pray for a lady who was a nurse. And she was in a dying moment. She suffered from the cancer of the throat. While she was writhing on this bed, turning and this way and that way, on one side was a gentleman, was her husband, who was paralyzed. And on the other side, there were young boys, and 3 young boys, and were looking at their mother was at her dying moment. Now, she was the breadwinner. Now, I asked the Lord, Father, how can we allow this to happen? Here is this woman dying, leaving these little children in the hands of a paralyzed man. Now, you know of these situations, people dying of sickness. Then, of course, some people die because of being killed. One time I was in the little town of Tofimvaba. We came all the way from Bethel College to bury 4 family members who were burnt alive in a building in Port Elizabeth. And all we had were just 4 plastics. And we're told that these were the remains of these people. Now, the people who were actually managing, the funeral, said that there must be no music. No music, there is no singing. In fact, the people that were allowed to go to the graveyard were only men. I stood above this grave and said to myself, if only we didn't have resurrection, would be the most hopeless people on earth. There are times when you can cling only to that hope that someday God is going to resurrect us. That was the situation. People die of being killed. There are also deaths caused by accidents. One time I was flown from East London, to Paarl. We were to bury 2 ladies who rolled with a car. They were coming from a funeral in East London. And on the way, their car was involved in an accident. Now, the family decided to call me from them. They flew me to come and bury these 2 ladies. It was full in that hall. Now, these ladies were here. And later, I was standing with the husband of one of these ladies. We were in a tent. It was a care meeting. And he looked at me, weeping, and said, Fundis, I thought that my wife would be with me when I go through this nightmare. At that time, his firstborn had left his family and went into the world. The second one was their daughter, who was pregnant, the second child, from a hooligan, was not even working. The third boy was in the hospital and with drugs. The last child was mentally retarded. The whole family had problems. Here is this man who was standing there. These are things that are happening, and people are left, to face up with these situations. Now, of course, there are challenges that face singles. Challenges that face singles. Let's start first with the women who have children outside wedlock. Who are here, some of them may be here, and of course, the others may not be. Now, the first challenge that you face is that of having a dented character. Remember, when you have a child from this man, another child from that man, still another child from that one, etc. Now, people have questions as to what kind of a woman is this one. Perhaps even your children are asking questions. I wonder, what kind of a mother we have, who seems to be available to every man that, goes by. And you are ashamed even to tell them as to who their fathers are. Because how are you going to do that? That is the first thing, your dented character. And then, of course, the second problem is these are reduced chances of getting married. You can imagine, here is a man seeing you, beautiful lady, looking at your legs, looking at your intelligence, feels that this is the right wife. But once you tell him your story, that I have a child, this child from so-and-so, another child from that one, and then immediately he is quiet, disappears into thin air. Because the question in mind, yes, I love this woman, but how am I going to manage, this trailer that is dragging? Die! So these are some of the challenges that you face as a young woman. You are actually shooting yourself on the foot. Don't know why you do that, my child. Then, of course, the third problem is the difficulty of raising children alone. I have found that it's difficult to raise children being a parent. And, being two, that's you and your wife. I also have children. I've been in the ministry close to 40 years, and much of my work had to do with dealing, with the families and their children. I know the challenges that people face there. I'm also a counselor. And there are people who come to my office with problems, with challenges that are brought by children. And then, of course, I'm also married and I have children. I know the challenges that you face. And when you are a mother, when you are a father. Now, how do you manage that when you are just single? And children perhaps may be subservient while they are still young. But let them come to the teenage stage. And the boy says that drug is nice outside. Young ladies also run after men outside. It is then that you break down. Many, many single parents break down here. So that is your challenge. The other challenge is the struggle for the support of the children. Remember that when a young man sleeps with you, he's not interested in taking care of children. As soon as you have a child, it's going to be a struggle for you to get him and support his children. I know of many young women who are frustrated because they have to go this alone. And the person who actually gave you this baby is nowhere to be found. So these are things that are happening. All right. Then, of course, the challenge that face the women who remain with children after divorce. Now, of course, the pain of divorce. I mentioned that, and I'm still going to talk about it later on. This is very painful. In fact, psychologists say that it is more painful than death. More painful than death. You who have been divorced, they say it takes 2.5 years just to come out of your system. I claim that it takes longer than that. So you are faced with that problem, and that we are going to be talking about. I'm sure I'll touch this on Sabbath. Not only touch, and I'll go into it. Then, of course, the loneliness. Loneliness, that is so real. That is so real, and you can almost touch it. It's very, very difficult to be in the church and being a single parent. And sometimes even those moments when people come together in the evening, coming back from work, you have no one, you have no companion, and to relate to. The times of Sabbath evening, that is the most lonesome moment in the church. Because everybody has been here, we are tired now, we go home, and you can't read, you can't do that. Some people will say, some couples will say, first, pizza. Ow! They go and enjoy themselves somewhere. You have no one to share that moment with. You're alone. I'm at Tube all day in December. When those who are in the south go to the north. Those in the north come to the south. Those in the east go to the west. Those in the west go to the east. And those moments do not mean anything to you. Because they need a companion. And for a while, you may enjoy the company of your children. But at some point, they do not need you in their lives. Then you feel the loneliness. I remember there is one young lady who called me in the night. Is that Pastor Mngqibisa? I said, yes. I could sense that she might have been married for some time. And she said, Mfundis, there is somebody who is proposing. But I'm not too sure if I should, consent to this. But Mfundisi, I want your opinion. I'm very lonely here. My children are now at tertiary. And she described, the room where she was. I suppose she wanted, to twist my arm so that I could say, you marry that person. Now, I would never do that because I didn't know who the person was. But the manner in which she spoke, you could even see, that loneliness. It's the loneliness that you are going to feel. And many of you are already experiencing as we speak. All right. Then again, the temptations that bombard you from left and right. Yo! Remember that you used to have somebody next to you. And suddenly, he is nowhere to be found. Of course, men, once they come into this sort of challenge, they can easily, look for a woman and propose for marriage. But you as a woman, it's very difficult to do that, isn't it so? In our culture, this is not totally accepted. I know that some people, kind of do it shrewdly. They have some ways of doing it. But to come out and say, brother, I've been observing you in the choir. We've been singing together. I feel that I need, to have you as my husband. Yo! That can be known in this township even before the end of the... And you can't do that. Yeah, and yet you feel that, man, temptations are bombarding you from left and right. I remember one time I was invited to a camp meeting. And while there, they sort of provided an office where I was going to be in the evening so that whoever wanted to see me would go to that office. Among the people that came to that office was also a lady who was a teacher. And as she came to me, she said, Mfundisi, I don't know whether they had divorced with their husband or he had died. Yeah, but she said, Mfundisi, I've been alone for a long time. For a while, I tried to resist, these temptations. But there came a point where I said, whatever happens, let it happen. Let it happen. I've just, Mfundisi, given in. And in fact, I said to the church, they must not appoint me for any office. Because I don't want anybody to come to me and say, sister, remember that you are a leader of the church. And therefore you need to behave. I don't want to hear that because it's too much. So that's exactly what happens to many of our young ladies who are here. Isn't it so? Yeah. I wish I could, it was during the day and talking to you alone. Because I would want you at least to give these testimonies. That's right. And these are things that are happening. These are things that are happening. And then, of course, the feeling of not being accepted by the society. Now, some of you will agree that once you lose a husband, whether it's by death and or sort of by divorce, people tend to keep you at arm's length. Yeah. Isn't it so? You feel that rejection. And they fear you. They are scared. Yeah. You are a menace to their marriages. Yeah, and you feel it. You walk it alone. So that's exactly what happens. That feeling of being rejected also kicks in. And then the difficulty of raising children alone, and which we have already mentioned. And all of these are challenges that face people who have lost their partners through death or through divorce. Of course, those that have lost, their husbands through death, the pain of loss of a partner through death. I think I mentioned this sometime, and that was either yesterday or day before yesterday. Of course, the loneliness that we've just mentioned is also another challenge. And then being bombarded by temptations also, comes and faces those who have lost their their partners through death. Then a feeling of not being accepted by the society, which many of you are suffering from as we speak. Then the difficulty in raising children single-handedly. And all of these face you. Now, of course, the question that comes, is there hope for the single parents? Now, I've taken a story of Ruth, because many will respond to this situation. And I'm sure you are going to identify with what we are going to say. I've taken a short story in the book of Ruth. Now, Ruth is a Moabite woman, and who comes into the picture by joining the family of Elimelech and Naomi through being married to their son. Now, after his death, that is Elimelech's death, she came to Bethlehem with Naomi. That is now Ruth. Of course, as I mentioned, that this young lady, by the way, has come into the picture by being connected with this family. She got married to one of their sons. They had two sons. Elimelech and Naomi had two sons, Machlon and Chilion. And then both of them got married to the Moabite young ladies. One took Orpah, and the other took Ruth, as we see here. But of course, these two sons also, died. Death came and swept, the whole family. It were only these three ladies who remained, licking their horns. Now, at some point, Naomi decided to go back home. And she begged these ladies to go back to their homes. And of course, one of them at last kissed her mother. And she also, went home. But Ruth said, don't even beg me to go back home. Where you go, I will go. Where you die, I will die and be buried there. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. So they went together. They went together and to Bethlehem. Now, there are four things that I'm going to pick up here, which are very, very important about Ruth. The first thing, Ruth changed her situation by being an achiever. I want you to listen to that as single parents. When she lost her husband, she, instead of brooding over her situation, over her plight, she changed her situation. She became an achiever. Now, in chapter 2, in the book of Ruth, chapter 2, verse 2, she says to her mother-in-law, let me go to the field and pick up the leftover grain behind anyone in whose eyes I find favor. It is this woman who said that. And then she displayed a work ethic that I suppose Boaz had never seen before, because he had a lot of workers, in his fields. And that work ethic is here in verse 7, still in chapter 2. And this is the report given by the foreman to Boaz when he asked as to who this young lady is. And then this man replied, she went into the field and has worked steadily from morning till now, except for a short rest in their shelter. And then verse 17 in the same chapter says, Ruth gleaned in the field until evening. Here is a woman who knew what it is to work. She needed no nudging. She needed no pushing. She worked hard. She began to show qualities that had been hidden till now. And they were exposed only when she lost her husband. Of course, many singles, by losing their partners, are forced out of their cocoon. For a long time, when they had those partners, they were covered, they were protected. But as soon as the husband dies or they get into divorce, then they are pushed out of their cocoon. Challenges rob them of their dependence or the dependence on their spouses that they've had. Like a snake that exchanges its old skin with a new one, they now begin to show qualities that have all along been hidden. This happens when people lose, their partners. They develop themselves in various areas, including education. They grow and educate their children single-handedly. This is what happens to many of the women that are here. Instead of sitting and brooding over their situation, they say to themselves, look, let me rise now and do something about my life. And many of them end up being community builders and leaders in this church. They begin to show qualities that have been hidden till now. When I was at Bethel College in 1983, that was the time when we had a lot of pastors, on our campus. In fact, we had Pastor Dumba, who was coming from Zimbabwe. Pastor Bengu was coming from KwaZulu-Natal. Pastor Mantla, who came from Port Elizabeth. Pastor Nia, who came from Cape Town. And I was also the pastor of the college. The very rector of the college was a pastor. Now we stood there like watchmen and on the walls of Zion. Yes, we wanted our children to excel in mathematics and physics, etc., etc. But our main job was to help these children to become heavenly candidates. In every class, there was prayer. There was prayer. We had week of prayers. Now, this young woman, who was called Mngqibisa, came from Tendane, was not an Adventist. She came from there. She lost her husband through death. And I think she had 3 children. Very young and tender. And she came to this school frantic because it would be said that the husband was seen in the cupboard, etc., etc. You know these black magics. And she came there and fell in our hands. We took her through, the teachings and the promises that God makes. And she was baptized. Now, when she finished matric, because she only had Form 3, which I suppose is grade 9, grade 9. She only had that grade 9. And then she went through our education and she got matric. From there, she went to Cape Town and joined the University of the Western Cape. She got a degree and a BCom degree. She went up. Today is one of the top people in a company. You don't see her easily. You have to go through some kind of security in order to reach her office. Here is somebody who was nothing, who could have died in Tendane, in obscurity there. But because of losing her husband, she said to herself, let me rise from this dust, pick myself up. Now she became somebody who she is today. Ow! All right. Again, the second thing, she focused on her mother-in-law rather than focusing on herself. Boaz replied, I've been told, she's now talking to Ruth, I've been told all about what you have done for your mother-in-law since the death of your husband. Hey. She provided for her mother-in-law. Maybe before I come to that one. Rather than for her to brood over a situation, she thought of her mother-in-law. She extended, her service to her mother-in-law and forgot about herself. Yay! And then, of course, she provided for her mother-in-law. Ruth also brought out and gave her what she had left over after she had eaten enough. Now, remember that she was working in the fields there. But as she was eating, whatever she was given, she thought of her mother-in-law and put this aside. When she came home, Mama, nakukucha. Nakukucha. Singles, you need to focus and on the miseries of others rather than to be continuously brooding about yours. Encourage them through emails. I wish you could do that from today. Collect, the emails of these people. Talk to them. Phone them. Spend money talking to those people. It's very strange. When you get involved in other people, you find that you are healed yourself. You forget about your pain and see that maybe they have a sort of a more serious pain than yours. That's very important. Organize yourselves into groups. I'm talking to you now as single parents. Organize yourselves into groups where you share ideas and consolation. Tutuzelanani. Share with others what has sustained you materially and spiritually. Now you suffered from the same thing. Now go to those, tell them this is what happened to me. This is how I sustain myself. That's what we need to do. Rather than, sort of grown out there, languishing in obscurity somewhere. Please try to gather others. And as you share your experience with them, you find that you are also encouraged. Very important. And then, of course, the third thing that happened to Ruth, she aspired to living a clean life. Now, chapter 3, verse 10 and 11 says, the Lord bless you, my daughter. This is Boaz talking to this lady. You have not run after the younger men, whether rich or poor. All my fellow townsmen know that you are a woman of noble character. Aye! Of course, there were probably Moabite men who chased after Ruth. I can see these young fellows. But she kept herself pure. She said, whoever will invade this body will do so in a godly way. I'm going to make myself available in a way that is not approved by God. So it's important for you to take care of your body. Take care of your body. Don't be a threat to people that are married. It's very important for you to look after yourself. As a single, aim to live a clean life. To be single does not give license for misbehaving. To lose a partner does not encourage loose living. With God's help, one can and should live uprightly. So that is very, very important. You see? And of course, the world watches you with admiration. You heard Boaz saying to this young lady, my townsmen know that you are a noble and you are a woman of noble character. And of course, set example even for your children. They must see that their mother, the death of our father or the divorce that she went through has not made her just to throw herself, into dogs. Live a clean life. So that's what Ruth did. Now the fourth thing, of course, is that she hid in God's wings. Listen to what Boaz is saying. May the Lord repay you for what you have done. May you be richly rewarded by the Lord, the God of Israel, under whose wings you have come to take refuge. Aye! Ruth ran to God in her plight. She hid in him her loneliness. From him she drew strength to withstand temptations and rejection. God was a refuge in her predicament. Singles, this is where you need to hide. God knows your pain of separation, blowing winds of temptations, heartbreaking effects of feeling rejected. He knows all of those things. Negative impact of loneliness. He understands that. Heavy responsibility of raising children alone. He's there. He's going to take care of you. All right. Now, of course, we need to look at how God responded to these singles. God protects the disadvantaged. In Exodus chapter 22, verse 22, listen to him. Do not take advantage of a widow or an orphan. If you do, and they cry to me, I'll certainly hear their cry. And listen to what he says. My anger will be aroused, and I'll kill you with the sword. Your wives will become widows, and your children fatherless. This is God. He is on the side of the singles. He is on the side of the divorcees. He's on the side of the widows. He is on your side. That is how God responds to this. Now he overruled on behalf of Ruth and gave her a better future. Ruth got married to Boaz, and she and Boaz gave birth to Obed. Obed became the father of Jesse. Jesse became the father of David. David became the grandfather of Jesus. Ruth became one of the only 5 women mentioned in the lineage of Christ in Matthew. She's one of the 5. Out of many men, a list of men that are there. I'm sure if we were to get to heaven and ask Ruth, and what do you think of the death of your husband? She might say to you, I was a fool. I never knew what God had up his sleeves for me. I didn't know that today, when the whole race of those will be saved, will trace their salvation right to Ruth. Of course, there are other singles that he cared for in the scriptures. For example, the widow of Zarephath. And at a time of drought and famine, this woman got a message from Elijah that this situation is still going to prevail and, ahead. But don't worry. I have a message from the mercy seat, from God himself, that is going to take care of you throughout this period. And again, the widow of Nain was crying, weeping because of her son was dead. Christ came, raised the son, gave back to the mother. And he cared for those who faced challenges. You look at the case of Joseph. He was sold by his brothers to the Ishmaelites out of hatred. The Ishmaelites sold him to the Egyptians as a cheap slave. In Egypt, he was accused of having raped Potiphar's wife, which he never did. He ended up in jail, where he probably would never have come out. Maybe he had questions about God's care, and he's listening here to prayer. Prayer coming from a broken heart. Why? Where is God? I'm in this situation. through all of this painful journey of his child, he kept a watchful eye. You know, it's marveling when you read this story and this story of Joseph. Each time he gets into another phase, the Bible says that God was with him. Gets into another phase, God was with him. God was with him. Yeah. And of course, finally having been raised to the throne of Egypt, speaking to his brothers, he said, do not be distressed and do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. This is Joseph. He never understood it when it happened, but late, as he looked back in retrospect, he saw that it was God all the way who accompanied him in that situation. You find Esther, a slave and an orphan, walked a painful journey which she never knew was going to end on the throne of Persia. Daniel landed in Babylon being driven with spears by enemies, only to end as one of the rulers of the land. Elijah, brokenhearted, sitting under a broom tree in the desert, prayed for his death. He never knew that on the other side, while he was praying this side, on the other side, heaven was preparing a chariot to bring him home, where he was awaited by a joyous welcoming. He never knew that. Never knew that. Singles, your story does not end where you are. No, it doesn't end there. God has a better plan for each of you in this room. He does not take your pain lightly. While he has not promised any one of us a smooth journey, but he has promised us a safe destination. Amen. He says, for I know the plans I have for you, declares the Lord. Plans to prosper you and not to harm you. Plans to give you hope and future. Hey, let us stand and pray together.
Hence the Bible calls him the second Adam, so that he may erase the faults of the first Adam. And you are no longer accountable for what the first Adam gave you through birth. I cannot be responsible for that. Had I been given a question and answer session, I would have rejected my mother.